Today we're talking about GDP, Gross Domestic Product. I know it sounds like a pretty formal term, but it is used to measure the economy, which by now we know the economy is made up of people and how hard those people work and the amount of borrowing those people can get, and that's what drives the economy. Now, in terms of participants in the economy, we all know that we have households, Australian companies, and a government. And now we can look at how do we measure this? How do we measure whether the Australian households, companies in Australia, and the government are doing better or worse every year? And the way we measure that is via GDP. So how do we add that up? We go GDP, we go consumption by households, mostly by households, plus investment mostly by companies, and government spending. And we add that all up. We add up what do they purchase, on what goods and services made in Australia are they spending money on. We add all that up to calculate whether we're doing better or worse. Then we look at how much we're exporting to the rest of the world of Australian goods and services. But then obviously we have to subtract the goods and services we're buying in Australia that are made somewhere else, because we only are concerned about what goods and services are made in Australia domestically. That's what domestic means in gross domestic product. What goods and services are made in Australia that we're spending money on. So that's what we do, and then we get a number, which is what the GDP number is. Now, why does it matter whether GDP goes up or down? Well, because when we're consuming and investing and doing all these things, it's always with a company. Companies are who sell goods and services. So when the GDP goes up, that means the company revenue goes up. And what can companies do when they're making more money? They can do a couple of things, but one of them is they can either pay higher wages, which you would be happy about because you work for a company, or they can pay higher profits. Now, wages go to households, right? You and I, households. So we're very happy if wages go up. Profits, they can go to shareholders. They go to shareholders, and shareholders can be households. So you can go out and buy Australian shares and you could become a shareholder, or they could go out to international households. So there's either Australian households or international households, but wages will generally be Australian wages, could be international as well. And so this is how it all works. Very simply, the households, companies, and the government and foreigners spend money on goods and services produced in Australia. The more money they spend on those goods and services, in other words, the higher the GDP, the more money that companies make comes into the company. The more money companies make means either higher wages, if they pass those through to higher wages, or higher profits, which, if you'd like to be, you could be a shareholder, which means the household, which is you again, benefits from higher profits. And so it's a big kind of circle. It goes around a circle. And so what the question is, how do we keep increasing the GDP? Because we've just realized that the higher the GDP, the more we're going to get paid in wages, or the higher the profits if we own shares as well, which is a really positive thing. So to increase GDP, what comes back to what I spoke about in the economic machine, is that when there's an up phase, is when we're able to borrow money and we can spend more money, which flows through to companies, which means they pay us more or higher profits, which is really great in the up phase. So it's either borrow more, which would increase GDP if you spend that money on goods and services in Australia. But there's another way, it's being more competitive internationally. If you're more competitive internationally, it means your exports are going up because you're selling more overseas, and potentially too, if you own more of the stock in Australia, more money will stay in Australia, because here, when it's an international shareholder, that's called a leakage. It goes out to their economy, and they can choose whether they invest it back into Australia, but it's still up to them to decide that. So I just wanted to run through how the GDP works, how that measures how hard the population's working, and also is fueled by borrowing most of the time, or how competitive we are as a country. But I think in another video I'm going to go through how the relationship between Australia and the international world has been working, and whether or not we're succeeding, and how the flows of money are all occurring.